Hello everyone, welcome to our Truth Be Told YouTube channel, with your hosts Rick Howard and Mike Maney.
Good day everyone. Good to be with you again to our YouTube Truth Be Told session. What is this today, Mike? Session 27, I think?
I think it is, yeah.
Okay, session 27. So we haven't gotten to a fuss yet. We haven't fallen out with each other yet. We haven't called each other heretics yet. So
there's still time.
God's grace has been with us too.
Amen.
I have been involved in many preacher schools, seminary kind of things throughout my ministry, where that would be usually what ended them, as the teachers, the ones in charge, would kind of start fussing with each other. And then it would just stop.
And then the H word would start flying.
Anyway, today is session number 27. Today is May the 5th, 2021.
Cinco de Mayo.
Yeah, it's Cinco de Mayo, which is a big deal here in California.
Mm-hmm.
Really big holiday. We have a large percentage of Hispanic people.
Yeah.
Hispanic background people. And is it celebrated up there?
We try to here.
You go out to the local taqueria?
Yeah. We try to, well, this one place closed down. The owner, all knew us, they all knew the Maney family.
I've been there with you.
Yeah. So he finally sold it to another Mexican restaurant. So now Vicky's been there once. I haven't been there yet. She said it wasn't as good. So,
well,
yeah.
May the 5th is a special date for me for other reasons. It was 7 years ago today. In fact, right about this time of day too. 7 years ago, 2014, my dad was in rehab. Recovering from, he had to have several bouts. He had to go to the hospital with his COPD, his heart, his lung problems. And he was just kind of going downhill, He was on oxygen all the time. And so he had another bout in the hospital, and then they put him in rehab. It's going to be for a few weeks and see if he could go home. So I had gone to visit him probably about 11:30. Him and my mom was there. So I visited a little bit and came to about noon, and they were going to bring him lunch. So I told him goodbye, and my mom stayed through lunch to help him. And then she left about 1 to come home and rest before she went back later, because he was scheduled for a shower at 2:00. So he went to take a nap. And so about 2:20 or something like that, I got a phone call from my mom. Said your dad's taken a fall in the shower, and they've rushed him to doctor's or Memorial Hospital. So I rushed down to Memorial Hospital about 2:30 or so on May the 5th, and to walk in and see him hooked up to a machine and tubes and everything already in him, and to me, he looked already dead, and he never recovered. So me and my sister Melinda and my mom were there trying to figure out what to do. My brother Steve was in Texas at a national sales meeting for his company, and my sister Rhonda lived in Washington. My other sister Wendy was in Sacramento, so they all made an arrangement. I told them all, you get here quick because it just doesn't look good. You could just tell,
Yeah.
So then they all made it down eventually, and we wanted to wait for a day or two just to see. But it was pretty obvious there was no chance. And so that Wednesday morning, which would have been May the 7th, we met with all the doctors, and they told us what their opinion was, and we all were in agreement that, okay, at 11 o'clock this morning, you take him off life support. And some of us stayed in there, some didn't. But as soon as they took him off life support, it was right away his body couldn't stay on its own.
It just shows you how fragile he was.
Yeah. So to me, May the 5th is when but officially it was May the 7th. But to me, to be there right as soon as his body collapsed and they put him on life support, and to see all that, to me, that's the day that he. But whenever the spirit leaves, I don't know. Maybe it was not till May 7th, or maybe, I guess it's not till May 7th because he was still officially alive.
Yeah.
So I plan on going to spend a little bit of time with my mom this afternoon and see what she wants to talk about. So yeah, it's we still lose loved ones like that, and I'm not really good at remembering special dates, birthdays, anniversaries, and special dates of people's deaths and things. But for some reason, that one really sticks. In fact, my wife yesterday said, "Are you okay?" Seemed like something's wrong with you. You're real quiet. So I didn't even realize it. That it's kind of melancholy. I didn't even realize I was thinking about it. But just in your own subconscious, it's there.
Yeah.
And so I knew that today would be kind of a day of remembrance, and but I can't think of a better way to spend it. He loved the Bible. He loved God's people. He loved listening to Bible lessons and sermons, and so I don't know a better way to honor him than be online with you. He always enjoyed you. He made it to Modesto.
Brother Lewis, I tell you, he was a soft-spoken, kind man. I remember that about him.
I've told people since then, I said it at his service, that I've never known anyone who lived the truth of the Bible better without being able to articulate the truth of the Bible.
Yeah.
He never was good at public speaking. I don't know that he could have stood up and given all the right scriptures and reasons and points of our primary doctrines. I mean, he could in general, but to go into it thoroughly,
right,
and all that, I don't know that he could have, but he lived it, which is more important.
Yeah.
A lot of people know it and don't live it.
So he was basically learning it from others and absorbing it into his own life and putting it into practice. Yeah.
He was always, he was a good soldier to the generals, Richard Harless and people like that. The loud voices who were always up in front. Yeah. But he was a loyal soldier. Yeah. And would not often say a lot, but he was like our church greeter. He really enjoyed that, to stand in the back and greet everyone. Welcome the visitors, give them information about our church. So he filled a very important role without having to be up teaching lessons or preaching sermons. Yeah. And, 1 Corinthians 12 talks about that, doesn't it? Those who are less noticed, those who are less, what's the old King James say, comely or something like that. But they are more honored than sometimes those who are more prominent in our eyes. Yeah. Because maybe they have a better heart, more sincerity, more love. And I think he was that type of man.
I think that the chance of pride is a lot less to fill one's heart when they're not in front.
Well, maybe so. Yeah, I think you're probably right. Yeah. So we're talking about another great man in these lessons. We're, 3 or 4 lessons now in Joseph, which it takes quite a bit to get through Joseph anyway. But we're looking for Christ in the Old Testament, and Joseph is the most complete, as far as number of things you can bring up of the type of Christ, both in Christ's first coming and second coming. So we've kind of broken it down into that. And we finished last session with Jacob, his father, finally making it down to Egypt. And the reunion of Joseph and Jacob was very emotional. Lots of tears, lots of hugging. But I wanted to tie all that in with today and try to maybe get through Genesis if we can. There's a verse at the end of chapter 41. After Joseph was out of prison after he was elevated by Pharaoh, after he offered the great solution of how to get through the 7 years of famine, and not just get through, not just survive, but thrive. Pharaoh became more powerful and more wealthy after the famine than he was before the famine. That's a rarity. You would never think that'd be possible.
Yes.
But it was all because of the wisdom of a man of God. And when I think of the millennial, and I think of another wise man that will be in charge of everything.
Amen.
And how that great tribulation of 7 years, not 7 years of famine in another way. And at the end of that, things are going to get really good because of another wise man of God. And so it says in verse 56, the famine was over all the face of the earth, just like the great tribulation will be. And Joseph opened up all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. So all countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain because the famine was severe in all the lands. And of course, the tie into Christ is that when he comes and takes care of those 7 years, he's the one directing them. He's the one bringing them about, and he's the one offering the solution afterward of his glorious kingdom. And all the world will come to Christ for food.
Yeah.
Spiritual food, even physical food. Then in 45 and 7, I think we read this last week, when he was revealed to his brothers, and they thought he was going to really strike out at them. But he came to understand the sovereignty of God and the providence of God in all this. And he said, God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So he was kind of a first fruit figure, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
Exactly like Christ. Christ, the first fruits, 1 Corinthians 15. And then the role of Joseph in being the first fruit was to prepare what he says, preserve a posterity. To preserve a people. Yeah. But by the time they came down there, he had also secured a place. So a first fruit to preserve a people and prepare a place. Yeah. Okay, there's Jesus right here.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so he is the first fruit. He is gone. And part of his purpose between his two comings is to prepare a people for a prepared place. It's exactly what's going on here.
Yeah. And that's what we see in John 14, right?
Exactly, yeah. Prepare a place.
Yeah.
And as I like to tell people, we like to dwell on the idea that he's preparing a place for us, but he's also preparing us for a place.
Yes.
And that's really the part we probably should dwell on most.
Well, we should, because the place is important, of course, because he put his name there. But he's also put his name, he has stamped his name on a people.
Yes.
A heritage, a people. And he knows the place is holy. He wants the people to match the place so that they will best appreciate what he's offered them, what he's given. I mean, can you imagine him just opening it up to anyone? And whether they appreciate it or not. I mean, you talk about a mixed multitude. So he's busy preparing the people to bring them to the height of appreciation and humility so that they would best appreciate what he's then offered them.
Yes.
So
John 14 would be the prepared place, and Ephesians 5 would be the prepared people.
Yes, absolutely.
That he might present to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle.
Yeah.
And that's the only kind that will be appreciative of the place.
Yes.
And that's the only kind of people that he will allow to enjoy that place.
Yeah. And the way to prepare those people, as I see it, is to bring them through suffering.
Yes. The same as him.
Yes.
He's the pattern.
Yeah. Because if you survive the suffering and you push through and you overcome it, that displays your level of intensity that you want the prize.
Yes.
If you hang in there.
And even though this principle is true, that his people must suffer before their glory, just like he did, as shown also in the life of Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
But when we preach that to our people, we need to be careful because, okay, if you're living in America the last 200 plus years,
mm-hmm.
you don't have
Right.
much suffering.
Right.
So people think, well, maybe I'm not going to qualify because I haven't
Mm-hmm.
suffered.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe the greatest display or the greatest type of suffering there is for us to truly take up our cross and deny our flesh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so every true saint, to be qualified for that special place, will go through suffering because we all battle our flesh nature.
Yes. Yes.
And we have to suffer, as Paul said, the loss of all things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the biggest loss of all things is to lose ourself.
Yes. Yeah.
To lose ourself.
Yeah.
And
And in particular, some people suffer the loss of loved ones, whereas others don't.
yes,
Some suffer the loss of a business, where others don't.
yes.
You know, some
Loss takes a different form, doesn't it?
It does. It takes a different
Yeah,
form.
and many people, it's the loss of parents, siblings,
Yes.
children.
Yeah.
And that's Jesus talked a lot about that.
Yeah.
You'll be hated by all men for
Yeah.
my name's sake.
Yeah.
That's a big suffering.
Yeah.
If you're truly going to be devoted to Christ, their suffering of some form will take place.
Yeah. Yeah. I even look at people who may not have children, and because I know the pattern is there's going to be some suffering. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so there'll be some suffering in some measure, in some way or form, because we know that without children, they're not going to suffer what a child can bring you to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some angst and some sleepless nights, and getting into trouble, things like that. That can bring suffering.
Sure.
Without children, you won't experience that. Well, then you'll experience it in some other way. You'll experience your trials in some other way.
I mean, the Bible speaks a number of places, Proverbs and Paul and Timothy, and just a number of places, and Christ certainly did,
Mm-hmm.
about the prosperity and peace and comfort is its own test.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes even more than adversity.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
In adversity, you can recognize
Mm-hmm.
where the battle is.
Yeah.
And God gives you the grace to stand up to it, even through suffering and torment. I think the greatest test that American Christians have had to face is peace and comfort can produce lethargy. It can produce sleepiness, spiritually.
Yes.
It can produce a false sense of I'm being blessed because I'm godly.
Yes. Yeah.
I have wealth. I have business success. I have properties. I have peace in my life. I have a strong, close family.
Mm-hmm.
And use all that as evidence that that's God's blessings because
Yes.
I am pleasing Him.
Yeah.
And it's that false sense of what evidence of godliness is in modern America that in some ways is more difficult to recognize
Mm-hmm.
and fight against
Mm-hmm.
than true adversity.
Yeah.
We're lulled into a sense of spirituality
Yeah.
based on the amount of comfort, prosperity in our lives.
Yeah.
And that in itself is very deceitful.
Mm-hmm.
And the battle against that within ourselves
Mm-hmm.
should become a suffering all of its own, because it takes really almost a deeper understanding of pride and humility. How God resists the proud, gives grace to the humble. No matter what our outward circumstances are, if they're pretty decent, we need to recognize that the flesh is still the flesh. And it must be crucified, and it must be offered as a living sacrifice to Him.
You know, you just described Job. You just described Job.
Job.
I mean, he had it all. Things were rolling along, and then boom, the shoe drops. You know, but here's the deal too. We've lived a pretty affluent life. Varying degrees, of course, but here in America, like you said, especially compared to the other countries,
yes,
it becomes a responsibility for us then to help those less fortunate while we're yet able. And so I think that's why God raises up some to be more affluent, so that they'll have the means then to help the lesser. You know what I'm saying? So then He gets glory, and as long as they keep that in mind, that He's only given it to them to share, that kind of keeps them mindful of the purpose and mindful of staying on the humble side.
The higher purpose of financial blessings is what Paul talks about in 1 Timothy 6, that you might have some to give to those who are in need. The higher purpose. And there's plenty of needs among God's people, among missionaries, among churches.
Now, if it reaches the level of James, if it reaches the level where James was talking about, and their high-minded attitude, that's not good. No, it's
not good at all.
No,
So let's talk about, because we've been spending a few weeks talking about all the different ways Joseph is a type of Christ, and there are many of them, and we probably won't bring out all of them. But we also need to be careful to point out that the difference between Joseph and Jesus is that Jesus knew all of this ahead of time. He helped plan all of it ahead of time. He agreed to all of it ahead of time. Whereas Joseph didn't have that foreknowledge, and it kind of came upon Joseph, a few things at a time, and certainly God gave him grace to deal with it as it came up. But would you want, if you were Joseph, would you want to know all of it ahead of time? It's a blessing that God has not given us omniscience or able to see the future very well.
We'd never leave the house.
We would really draw back from it, wouldn't we?
We would, yes.
So Jesus is greater than Joseph, is my point. Is that He planned and agreed to his suffering. It didn't just come on, like with Joseph, it just came on him. I mean, that was right. You say God's plan or whatever, but
he had to deal with it as it came.
He was innocent as far as he did not cause it, but Jesus planned it and agreed to it. That's a pretty big difference.
Yes, absolutely.
So, but in both cases, the beloved son becomes a servant, and then he becomes ruler. And the beloved son was given this coat of many colors, a picture of glory and majesty. Joseph had his taken from him. Jesus had his taken from him, but willingly.
Yeah.
So in essence, Jesus laid it aside.
Yes.
So Joseph didn't quite have the degree that Jesus had about that. So we don't want to be guilty of elevating Joseph to the same level as Jesus.
Right.
There's some differences about Christ that makes him so much greater than Joseph.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So chapter 46, when Jacob said in 45:28, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." So he's revived.
Mm-hmm.
And chapter 46, Israel, Jacob took his journey with all that he had, came to Beersheba, offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Then God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night. So Jacob had several of these visions between him and God. And here's another one. And said, "Jacob, Jacob." And he said, "Here I am."
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot in that statement.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of back in chapter 22 when God called his grandfather Abraham to offer Isaac. He said, "Abraham, Abraham." And Abraham said, "Here I am."
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking about that little phrase, "Here I am," which is a perfect description of the attitude of Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was basically, "Here I am. I'm at your disposal, Father. Whatever you desire, I will do."
Yeah.
But this idea of even Abraham and Jacob is the attitude that God wants from us.
Mm-hmm.
If we can kind of sum it down to 3 words, it's have an attitude of, "Here I am.
Mm-hmm.
I'm yours.
Yeah.
Do with me what you will.
Yeah.
Your will be done, not mine."
Yeah.
So it's speaking about availability and willingness and
Yeah.
surrender and submission and all of that is packed into those 3 little words.
And that doesn't come automatically because of, you mentioned our flesh nature. It has to be hammered and shaped on the anvil of life. And so we don't just hand our life over the moment we're saved or even the moment we're baptized. You know, I mean, it takes a concerted effort and a draining of self. It really does.
Yeah, salvation and then baptism speaks about full surrender.
Yes.
It speaks about immersion into the life of Christ, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But speaking to it and actually living it are usually 2 different things.
Yeah. The beauty of it is that knowing that it's going to take some work to break the colt. God's grace
or in Jacob's case, would Jacob have so quickly and freely said, "Here I am," before his hip was knocked out of joint?
Good point.
Yeah, before he wrestled with God all night.
Uh-huh.
See, he was a little bit more reluctant before then, huh?
Uh-huh.
But afterwards, he was broken.
Yeah.
As we talked about before.
Yeah.
And he said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there." So God being in control of all of it, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were given these promises about being a great nation in a promised land. But the outworking of it was somewhat of a mystery. God had told Abraham, "Okay, they're going to have to go away for 400 plus years before I bring them back."
Yeah.
But he didn't give a lot of details. Says they'll end up serving that nation where they go. Okay, they did.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes God just gives us enough, and then with all the details says, "Just trust me for the rest. I'll take care of it."
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So he says, "I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again." Okay, so there's that assurance.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to go down there, but I'll bring you up. Of course, Jacob never came back alive, did he?
Right.
He came back to be buried.
Yeah.
So he's talking about his people as well, his seed. "I'll bring you up again, and Joseph will put his hand on your eyes," which is, how does the old King James say that? Is that put his hand on your eyes? The end of verse 4?
4. Yeah, upon his eyes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The symbol of when somebody dies, you close their eyes with your hand. And the way he's telling them, "I'll make sure that Joseph is there when you die."
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty good.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good promise, isn't it?
Yeah. And was it Jacob that gathered himself in the bed?
Yes.
Ready to die. And talk about an attitude. Okay, guys, I'm ready. full confidence.
Well, I mean, he was, what was he at this time? 130. Yeah, he tells Pharaoh in 47:9, I'm 130 years, and he died at 147, which is interesting. So he was in Egypt 17 years, which is exactly the number of years he had Joseph before Joseph was sold into slavery.
Mm.
It's kind of interesting.
It is.
Gave back those 17 years. But, he's 130. He knows his time is short. And to hear from God, don't worry, I'm going to let you go down there. You're going to spend some time with your beloved son, and he's going to be there when you die. I mean, that's kind of like, okay.
Yeah.
I can go in peace.
Yeah.
I can go in contentment now.
Yeah.
So the rest of this chapter talks about the number of them. And it says in verse 15, all the persons, his sons and his daughters, were 33. So we don't know if that means he had 26 daughters. Maybe it includes some daughters-in-law. May well have. But it appears he had at least as many daughters as he did sons. Mm-hmm. So we're told about Dinah. They're not really named, and we're not really told too much about them, but it says in verse 18, these were the sons of Zilpah, whom Laban gave to Leah his daughter, and these she bore to Jacob 16 persons. So she had a bunch of daughters.
Yeah.
He just doesn't name them.
Mm-hmm.
And then it keeps going and names them, and it lets us know that, for instance, in verse 10, the sons of Simeon, and that names his sons, and it says the last one, Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman. Mm. So this is one reason why God's getting them down to Egypt, is because they're starting to, Judah with Tamar and Simeon. So they're starting to intermarry and have relations with Canaanite women. And God had already decided to curse the Canaanites, wanted them to eventually be destroyed. So he removes his people away from the Canaanites. Much easier to be separate in Egypt, partly because Egypt were cattle people and Jews were sheep people. And then he gave them a separate piece of land in Goshen. So there were just kind of natural separations. Easier for them to remain separate in Egypt than to stay in Canaan. So God was preparing the Canaanites to be destroyed so that the land would be ready for when Joshua brought them in later. So God had a long-term plan in all this.
He did, yeah. And he didn't seem to be in a hurry.
A long-term plan. When he sent his son to be born, to minister, to die, to rise from the dead, and to ascend, is just the first part of a long-term plan. To bring his people into their promised land.
And when we look at the whole thing in the terms of the creative week, or the redemptive week, I should say, being 6 days, that whatever he was going to do within these 6,000 years, that had to be kind of spaced out, sped up, slowed down, whatever, to feed into this container, this trough of 6,000 years. And so there was stretches of time where, he worked slow, and others where he picked up speed. And I think now we're starting to pick up a little speed with the end times, it seems.
Yes, it does seem to be picking up speed. At the end of verse 27, all the persons of the house of Jacob who went to Egypt were 70. There's something real interesting about that number 70, isn't it?
Yeah.
Prophetically and within the scriptures. Jewish tradition said there were 70 Gentile nations. Moses selected 70 elders to help him. Jesus sent out 70 in Luke 10. He sent out 70 2 by 2 in that limited commission.
Yeah.
The 70 weeks of Daniel occurred. So there's 10 times 7, 7 being the perfect number, and both 7 and 10 being perfect numbers. 70 seems to have a real special place in God's plan. It's just, this is literally true. There were 70 who went down to Egypt. One reason why he gave the numbers so that it could be contrasted with the several million who came out.
Yes.
To show how that God made them prosper even in servitude. But there's something deeper here also prophetically, is that the 70 that went in were the seed form of the nation that he had planned from the day he called Abram out of Ur. 70 is representative of the whole. And so do that what you will, but and then there's other 70s in the Bible. And then 70 times 7 being 490 is a real important Bible number. We're to forgive 70 times 7, which in the context of Daniel's 70 weeks, basically Jesus is telling Peter, keep forgiving until I come back again. The fulfillment of the 490. So there's some connection there too. Interesting. It was important that he mentioned there were 70 for several reasons. Then there's something in verse 28 that I'm not quite bringing out. Maybe you have something. Then he sent, this is Jacob, he sent Judah before him to Joseph. So here's the 2 birthright sons. Why did he select Judah to go to Joseph? To point out before him the way to Goshen. And they came to the land of Goshen. So here are the 2 birthright sons working together to determine the prepared special place and to dwell in.
Well,
there's something prophetic and spiritual in this verse.
I think so.
Not quite getting out.
Yeah.
We'll get into more of these 2 in chapter 49. When Jacob pronounces the blessings on them. I don't know if there's anything in chapter 46 you want to bring out, but it does say in verse 34, talking to Pharaoh, your servant's occupation has been with livestock from our youth even till now. So there's the cattle part of the Egyptians. Both we and also our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. Even though Pharaoh was going to treat them well because of Joseph, there was still this natural animosity. I mean, we've seen it in the history of our country between the cattle and the sheep people. They moved west.
Yes.
And they began to put up barbed wire fences for cattle, and the sheep people hated it, and they'd tear down the fences.
Range wars.
Range wars. That's exactly what it was. But God worked in that natural animosity to keep a certain amount of separation.
Yes, he did.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, too, applying it to the church, our doctrine in itself poses an animosity because the religious world has, of course, globbed on to this universal church idea. And so, we don't agree with that. So just our doctrine alone keeps us separate, keeps us in the land of Goshen, as it were, aiding to the warning that we will be hated of all nations for his namesake, because that word authority is just a stickler in many people's craw.
It's interesting, this little discussion, the first part of chapter 47, as they're getting settled and being introduced to Pharaoh, and 5 of his brothers came. He presented them to Pharaoh, And so they're having this little discussion. We're shepherds,
Mm-hmm.
and here's our history, and please let us stay here during this famine. And Pharaoh said in verse 6, the land of Egypt is before you. Have your father and brothers dwell in the best of the land. Why would Pharaoh
I know.
give the best of his land to foreigners? Because of Joseph.
Yeah.
Joseph. He's the key.
Mm-hmm.
Let them dwell in the land of Goshen. And here's an interesting little kind of prophetic thing about future rulership, future responsibilities over the nations. If you know any competent men among them, then make them chief herdsmen over my livestock. So he's finding a way to elevate the brothers of Joseph
Mm-hmm.
over his property. There's just some real good stuff going on there. What's that?
Even over the Egyptians.
Over the Egyptians, yeah. He's given Joseph's family the best of the land and opportunity for advancement as some sort of rulership role, authority role.
We have to remember that Egypt was no slouch nation. I don't know that this was at its zenith as far as power, but I mean, they seemed to be getting along just fine before the Hebrews showed up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They've always been a powerful empire.
Yeah.
Doing just fine, especially now. It's like they have become the most important country and ruler on the face of the earth, at least in that part of the world. Mm-hmm. Everyone had to come to Egypt. And that meant Pharaoh was the most important ruler, and yet Pharaoh was giving the honor to Joseph, and yet Pharaoh was the God figure to the Egyptians.
Yes, he was. Yes.
And yet he was giving his honor to another.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, it is. And then we have this meeting between Pharaoh and Jacob. This is an interesting little part of the story. Verse 7, Joseph brought in his father Jacob, setting before Pharaoh. Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Mm-hmm. Pharaoh said to Jacob, how old are you? Jacob said to Pharaoh, Jacob's, the wording of this has just always been so interesting to me. Mm-hmm. The days of the years of my pilgrimage, interesting word, sojourning, are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. Few and evil. The Lord had blessed him a lot. Mm-hmm. But, I see this bumper sticker around there, and there's a real truth in it. It says, life is short and then you die. And they're just kind of it's almost like what Jacob is saying here. Mm-hmm. It's like he's not even talking about all the blessings and maybe the victories of his life or anything like that. Okay, I'm 130 and it's been short and it's been evil. And I'm ready to go home to be with the Lord. That's kind of his. And I've known a lot of people like this that they really have served the Lord faithfully. Mm-hmm. The Lord has blessed them. But, everyone has a lot of heartaches through life. Mm-hmm. You kind of get to the end of your life and your body's kind of failing you and you've had a lot of heartbreaks. And you get to a point where you say, life is short. And it's been pretty tough.
Yeah.
I just want to go home and be with the Lord.
Yeah. So you just
a lot of older people just kind of say that same thing to me.
You just gather your feet in the bed and just, get ready,
Yeah.
But prior to him coming down there, especially when he heard the news of Joseph having been eaten by a wild animal and they showed him the garment, I think he went into a depression. And I don't know that he fully recovered from those days onward.
Well, that's what he told his sons when they tried to comfort him, huh?
Yeah.
He refused to be comforted.
Yeah.
And he said, I will go down to my grave in grief.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think until he was reunited with Joseph, I think he probably was in a state of depression.
Yeah.
I mean, his sons were grown, able to take care of themselves. He had Benjamin, but Rachel died, and his beloved wife, his beloved son was gone. He had reached a point of age where he probably wasn't able to exert himself much. His sons had to do the labor and everything. So he was just, in some ways, he was kind of a sad old man waiting to die.
Yeah. I think he was more focused on the last few years than maybe the previous years. I think that was probably standing out more to him.
That's why I like back in chapter 45 and verse 27, after they told him in verse 26 that Joseph is still alive. And it says, Jacob's heart stood still because he did not believe them. When they told him all the words which Joseph had said to them, when he saw the carts which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob, their father, revived. His depression was broken. But I think you're right. I think he had years of sad depression. And finally, here's this little bit of a spirit flickers up inside of him, kind of reviving him.
I like the word pilgrimage. What does the New King James say? In, back to 47:9.
Pilgrimage.
Okay.
The footnote says sojourning.
I just like the way that's phrased, because that's really what our lives are. And back to your mentioning of affluence and the dangers that it poses.
We get too settled, don't we?
We get too settled.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. So I think as long as we remember that we're in a pilgrimage, meaning there's something we're heading toward, and as long as we keep our eye on that city, I think it helps us to not get too settled in.
And then Joseph, as he's dealing with the famine, well, first of all, in 47 and 12, since we're trying to tie these into Christ, Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with bread according to the number in their families. So it's Christ the provider, providing the bread of life to his brethren, his family. Now there was no bread in all the land in verse 13. The famine was very severe. So Joseph starts working to where he's basically, he's doing a good thing. He's rescuing the people, but he's also enriching Pharaoh with wealth and power. So it's like it's a win-win. And so by the end of this, in verse 25, here's the idea of Savior, Joseph the Savior. So they said, meaning everyone who received benefit from him, you have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. So we have a Savior. He saved our lives. And we desire to find favor in his sight. We will be servants of the only one in some sense that is over him, and that is his father. In this case, Pharaoh, but in Christ's case, he pictures his father above himself, even though we say they're equal, but I'm talking about just in this context.
In his submissive role as son, that's what we see.
So a Savior. And it says in verse 27, Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions there and grew and multiplied exceedingly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. It's interesting. So the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. So he calls Joseph. He knows his time. And he tells him in verse 29, here they're living at the pleasure of Pharaoh. They're living in the best of the land. Everything is just as good as it could be under the circumstances. But he still remembers the promises, the promised land just for them. So he says at the end of verse 29, please do not bury me in Egypt. But let me die with my fathers. You shall carry me out of Egypt, bury me in their burial place. And Joseph said, I will do as you have said. And he said, swear to me. He swore to him, so Israel bowed himself on the head of the bed. Like you said, he curled up his feet.
Yeah.
And, he made this final request of Joseph, and Joseph promised to honor it. And so Jacob knew that he was going to be buried back there with his father, his grandfather, in the land of promise. And like Joseph making them promise to take his bones with them when they finally would leave, and Moses did that. But he didn't get the idea, because it's the same faith and the same promises. But the example was his own father, Jacob, saying, do not bury me here, because this is not my land. Bury me in the land of promise.
Yeah.
So just the idea of faith in the promises of God, even in death, symbolic to those still living, that this is not our home. We have a home that God gave to our fathers. So,
if anyone had reason to be settled in, it would have been Joseph. I mean, he had the best of the best.
Yes, he did.
He went through his trials, but then it all worked out, and he could have just wanted that more than anything else.
But he was able to protect and provide for his family, and but all of them knew, and they all knew that promise that God gave to their father Abraham.
Yeah.
That they're going to have to, in the fourth generation, I'll bring them out of there.
Yeah.
And so when the time of the promise drew near, in Exodus 1, some of them at least knew that. The Jews were always good at calculating time and the calendar and everything. So I think Abraham probably passed that information on to them. And so they knew in some sense that their stay in Egypt was temporary. I mean, it's easy for us to say temporary when 4 generations, that seems like a long time.
Yeah. But every bit as much as they were anticipating the release, we're anticipating the return.
Yes.
And so we can understand that anxiousness and always keeping that promise in front of you while waiting for the fulfillment.
So word came to Joseph in 48 that your father's on his deathbed. And so he brings his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and Jacob was talking to him just before his death. He said in verse 4 that God told me, behold, I will make you fruitful, multiply you, I will make you a multitude of people, give you this land to your descendants after you as an everlasting possession. So he's setting it up to pass on that promise to Joseph through Joseph's sons. And so it went through that. And we talked about this a few weeks ago, but that it still brings me a lot of satisfaction that as much as we build up Joseph and we tear down Jacob, it was Jacob at his death who had more spiritual understanding than Joseph did when he crossed his hands and gave the blessing to the firstborn blessing to the younger.
Yes.
And Joseph tried to stop him. It says in verse 14, Israel stretched out his right hand, laid it on Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, guiding his hands knowingly. So God had revealed it to him. For Manasseh was the firstborn, and he blessed Joseph and said, God before whom my fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Isaac walked, the God who has fed me all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from evil, bless the lads, let my name be named on them, the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth, which Jerusalem and Israel is in the very midst of the earth, the middle.
Yes. Yep.
When Joseph saw that his father's laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. He wasn't used to anyone not obeying him. Joseph was used to everyone doing exactly even his father. I mean, he'd set everything up for his father and his brothers, and they followed the directions of Joseph. And now here is his father not following the directions of Joseph. Displeased him. So he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim. Oh, my dad's on his deathbed and he can't see very well and he can't hear very well and his mind is not working well. And I've got to correct his big mistake. And so he says, not so, my father, in verse 18, but his father refused. I like this. Even on his deathbed, he says, I'm still the father and you're still my son. You may be the boss of Egypt, but I'm the boss of you.
Can you picture right about that, a big hand slap?
His father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. Don't worry, my son. Don't worry. I know what I'm doing. He shall become a people. It'd be great, but truly his younger brother shall be greater than he. His descendants shall become a multitude of nations. So he blessed them. And he set Ephraim over Manasseh. And Israel said to Joseph, behold, I am dying, but God will be with you, bring you back to the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to you one portion above your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow. So, of course, chapter 49 is that great prophetic chapter of Jacob's last words. And he tells all of his sons to gather together. I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. So there's some pretty major things we need to bring out in chapter 49 and 50. And I told you at the beginning I'm going to go over and visit my mom for a little bit. It's the anniversary of my dad's passing, at least the first stage of it. It took 3 days before it became official. So I think I better close out here.
Okay.
But
another good session.
If you don't mind, for next session, put together some of your own thoughts from chapter 49. I'd like to hear what they are, because it's as many times as I've studied this chapter and brought lessons and sermons, I feel like there's more to bring out than what I have been able to. So see what you want to bring out from chapter 49.
Sure.
And then we'll lead into 50 and close out Genesis and get ready for Exodus.
Only 65 books to go.
Fortunately for our viewers, we expect Genesis to be by far the largest amount of sessions of any book. We're trying to lay down the foundation so that we can continue this theme through the other books and see where Christ is on every page, really, but just trying to pick out the ones that we can see and understand.
Yeah.
And apologize to him when we stand before him and say, boy, you boys sure missed a lot of them.
You missed a lot, yeah. Well, Lord, that's why we're here. Fill us in.
He said, okay, sit down for the next 1,000 years. And I'll show you.
You think you guys took a long time. Yeah, you're in for a real surprise here.
I've really enjoyed the last number of years describing the millennial as a 1,000-year Bible study.
Oh, yeah.
It will be. And he's going to show us things that, we're going to slap ourselves and say, how could I have ever missed that? He's going to say, you only thought you knew John 3:16. Let me tell you the deeper meaning.
Yeah.
You only thought you knew Ephesians 2:8-9. Let me explain it to you a little more clearly. You only thought you understood 23rd Psalm.
Yeah.
Let's take the next month and go over it slowly. Because your mind can't grasp it all at once.
Well, he'll have all the time in the world on his hands.
And so we won't have anything better to do, will we?
That's right.
Of course, we'll have lots of responsibilities, and we know all about that in the millennial. But our best time will be choosing the better part, sitting at his feet, listening to his words.
The best time will be the seminary.
Say, every once in a while he'll say, okay, now you need to be Martha and go out and get busy, do some work.
Yeah.
But when you're done, come back here and sit at my feet, and I'll
Yeah.
give you another Bible lesson.
Yeah. Gladly. Oh, I can hardly wait.
Yeah.
I can hardly wait. Well, another really good
I
session,
guess in
brother.
closing, we should say that here in Modesto, California, on May the 5th, 2021, it's going to be in the low 90s. And I understand you're going to be like pushing 70 or so today. Is that right?
Yeah, 70s, and tomorrow's supposed to be in the 80s. Yeah.
Heat wave.
Yeah, a heat wave. Yeah.
But I do see rain and back in the 50s over the weekend, I think, for you.
Yeah. So it's just up and down. This is just that time of year where it's just up and down until finally summer rolls in, and we get up into the 80s, even 90s.
Yeah.
And by then you're 110.
Yeah, we are. Well, thanks, Mike. Good talking to you again.
Well, yes, and I'll be praying for you. Have a good visit with your mom.
I will. I'll tell her hi for you.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, Mike. Thanks.
Okay. Bye now.